So I am going to be the one moderating the panel. It's sort of strange that you'd replace somebody from a union with probably the most arch free market guy in this room, but whatever. That seems to work at these sorts of conferences. So what we're going to be talking about here is the marijuana industry and also the economics of legalization. And so on the panel we have Abhi Sivasailam, who is on our board of directors and also works on what all, like you work for a billion different things. Would you like to list some of them? Or?
Sure. So as far as nonprofit goes, working on cannabis, on the national side, I'm also on the board of American Bridge Coalition and National Cannabis Coalition, which are kind of the parent orgs that funnel financial and other kinds of resources to state campaigns in Missouri, as well as a state campaign in Oregon to legalize in 2014. On the for-profit side, I'm a consultant, and so I have on the non-marijuana side, I'm like a Fortune 50 statistical and economic consultant. On the marijuana side, I am a part owner of the Weed Blog, which is one of the largest marijuana blogs. We have a recently formed with a business partner of mine a cannabis cultivation consultancy, and a few other things here, which we'll touch on.
You need to stand when you speak.
And then we have Alison Holcomb, who was, you guys have seen before, hopefully. She is the leader of the IFAC campaign. She'll be talking a lot about how the cannabis industry is coming along in Washington. They've just announced some new regulations, and they should be online at the end of the year, correct? Right, excellent. So we'll start off talking about the economics of marijuana legalization. Last year, Show Me Cannabis released a report with Jeff Myron of Harvard University, who has done a lot of work on the economics of legalization, both for marijuana and for other drugs. And Abhi helped Dr. Myron prepare a report specifically on Missouri. And so you could talk a little bit about how that report was put together and the sort of its findings.
Sure. So Myron and I put together some work for Oregon and Missouri. There are a lot of different economic impact papers out there. Using a lot of different types of methodologies. There's the Myron paper, and then the RAND Corp also has their own method. So if you want to check out different types of economic impact papers, those two would be good ones to start with. As far as the economic impact paper in Missouri goes, it was just basically what Myron has been doing for other states for the past 10 years. We looked at expenditures and we looked at cash receipts. So for expenditures, we kind of parsed out implicitly what the cost of prohibition is in terms of law enforcement expenditures, judiciary expenditures, and penal expenditures. So for the law enforcement, we looked at Missouri's total law enforcement expenditures, state and local, multiply that by some ratio of what is actually spent on arrest capacities, and then multiply that basically by the number of arrests there are for marijuana. And we got to some number, I don't really have it in front of me. I know the total expenditure amount added up to about 90 million. And then we did something similar for the judiciary, where we looked at, we used publicly available data to see what is Missouri spending, what are total Missouri outlays, state and local, for the judiciary. We multiplied that by like 41.7%, which is the amount the court system is actually spent on prosecuting felony and misdemeanor cases. And then we took some kind of a ratio of the number of cases that actually went through, and we tried to find out, ultimately what's actually being spent implicitly on marijuana expenditures. And then something similar was done with penal expenditures. We looked at total penal outlays and then multiplied that by a ratio of the number of marijuana-only offenders that were in the prison system. And so we came out adding all of that together at about $90 million in implicit value. And that's really important because when we talk about economic impact, one of the things I try to tell people is that we don't want to overstate our case. I think we do that a lot. And I think we'll talk about that in other capacities during this conversation. But this $90 million isn't something that returns to the coffers, right? The $90 million is going to stay there. Is going to be used by the police to do other things. So it's really $90 million in value that's returned to the people, not really $90 million that's available to the public to consume. So the argument really is, look, that's $40 million in law enforcement resources that's returned in value that can be diverted to other more high value uses. And then on the tax side, on the tax receipt side, there are a lot of different ways to do this, and this is really one of the major points where there's diversion between the Myron paper and the Rand paper and other papers out there. So basically what we did is there's a lot of publicly available data out there, some good, some not so good. So we looked at consumption data. So there is, the ONDCP does collect consumption data on a state level, and so we were able to use state level consumption data and then combine that with state level or individual level expenditure data, right? So we can see how many grams, what weight of marijuana is consumed in Missouri on an annual basis. What marijuana costs, how much people are spending, how much the average user spends, how many users there are. We were able to combine all of this to get a total kind of market size, and then we were able to multiply that by basically a tax rate that resembled alcohol. So alcohol is syntax, tobacco is a syntax. So we kind of considered, what would marijuana bring in Missouri if marijuana was taxed similar to alcohol in terms of composite taxes that were levied on alcohol. And the number we came up to was, I think, about 30 million. So we came out to an economic impact totally, $60 million in implicit value, and then $30 million in explicit value of, about $90 million. Actually, that's not true. We came out to...
It was 49,
yeah,
it was
$59
$59 million, it was $149 million.
It's $59 million in taxes.
He did the study, but I have to say it as a talking point, so I learned it a little bit better.
It's also, one of like 20 studies we've done at this point, so who knows the numbers anymore. And there's also something he said about, that was considering a certain model of tax. Now in Missouri we're going to have to do another round because we're going to wrap up this ballot initiative, and then we're going to have to refresh the numbers because we're not taxing in quite the same way as alcohol. So we'll run the numbers again, we'll have new talking points soon. But I think it's important, and again, I want to touch on this throughout this conversation here, how important it is to not overstate the case. So if it is $60 million, that's $60 million, but it's not going to close budget shortfalls in Missouri or other states. The General Assembly can spend $60 million in 10 minutes, right? That money can be reappropriated very quickly, and I think it's also important to talk about this in terms of opportunity costs, right? So $60 million, not only are we bringing that $60 million, from the underground economy, and that's meaningful, in its own right, but it's also, I think, helpful, and our polling shows this as well, and maybe also talk about this, to talk about it in terms of goods that you can buy, right? So it's not $60 million, it's, I can double the per pupil student expenditure in Missouri for, X amount of years, or, I can decrease the shortfall in just higher education by 50%, which these aren't true. That's the economic impact side of things. We're going to be publishing more economic impact papers now that we're going to be filing an initiative, and then there's also a whole host of other research that we're planning on doing over the next year through SMCR as well as through National Cannabis Coalition, American Vigil Coalition, things like trying to get a better understanding of what the market elasticity is for people. If prices go up for marijuana, how do I respond? What the legal elasticity is for people. If marijuana is actually legal, how much of actually shifting demand, and a whole host of other questions as well. So, if you guys have ideas as well, we're always welcome to hear it. This is an evolving research program. So, if there is compelling research out there, research topics out there that you'd like to see explored, we're happy to do that. So, feel free to get my contact information.
Where can we find that information?
Excuse me?
Where can we find the information from that study?
The study is available, the Missouri study that was done in 2011 is available on the website, on Chevy Cannabis' website. And then, like I said, there will be a new version as well that comes out, and we'll put that on the website as well.
Yeah, I believe the study itself is one of the top features on our website. It's, if you scroll through the first 2 or 3, I think it's the 4th one. But hold your questions. We'll have time for questions at the end. But yeah. So Alison, I know that when you talk about how legalization happened in Washington, you said that I believe the second most effective message was the amount of revenue that it could bring into the state. What sort of estimates did you have for Washington, and how are those playing out now? Obviously I would imagine those estimates are being revised upwards or downwards as it gets closer to the industry actually taking off.
Right. Great question. So, in terms of the estimates and where they are now, I think where we are now in Washington is people are finally realizing that they should stop trying to make estimates. I just want to reinforce what Abhi says is don't overstate your case. we had our case overstated for us, and I'll explain what I mean by that. When we were drafting Initiative 502, what had already happened in the state of Washington is that Representative Mary Lou Dickerson had introduced a legalization bill. She introduced it in 2010. In 2010, Washington State was still a state monopoly for liquor, so we had liquor stores that were owned and operated by the state. And the alcohol taxes that I was talking about, the sin taxes, we did have those, but a lot of the pricing control was actually done by the state. So the state could just directly do a markup on the alcohol and not say that it was taxing you 40%, which is what it was doing. But of course there's some markup and then there's a smaller tax at the end, right? So what Representative Dickerson did when she introduced her first legalization bill was she proposed putting marijuana into the state monopoly liquor system. So the pricing would be controlled by the state in terms of the markup and the taxes on it. There'd be that direct control. And a fiscal note was produced. So in Washington State, we have the Office of Financial Management, which for any legislation that looks like it's going to get a hearing, a legislator will ask for that office to produce a fiscal note to analyze the impacts of the bill's passage. That bill was introduced in, I'm trying to think if there's a fiscal note on the state monopoly one. I think there was, and I want to say that it estimated revenue somewhere around $230 million annually from marijuana, putting into place some assumptions that markup would be operated essentially like hard alcohol. Then Representative Dickerson introduced a second legalization bill in 2011, so just a couple of months before we finalized Initiative 502, and I think a new fiscal statement on her revised bill put revenues for that bill at, if I'm remembering correctly, $380 million a year, something like that. So again, this is in the context of a markup. So when we were drafting Initiative 502, our goal was to try to get to an estimate that would be roughly equivalent to what Mary Lou Dickerson's bill's fiscal note said, understanding that that was a state monopoly system, and with 502 we were not going to create a state monopoly. We were going to have private actors in the marketplace that were going to be regulated by the state, but we couldn't have markup. The state couldn't mark up the price of marijuana itself. Price would be determined by competition in a market system. So we had to figure out what tax level to put on the product to get roughly in the same area as these fiscal notes. Now, complicating this, of course, is that I'm not convinced that there's ever been an accurate estimate done of the actual cost of production of cannabis in the legal market. RAND did one in 2010 when Proposition 19 was on the ballot, and at the low end, considering industrial agricultural techniques, I think that their lowest estimate for the cost of production for a pound of cannabis was $70 a pound, right? And then they were estimating that with indoor production, I want to say it was maybe $200 a pound. Do you remember that? 180, something like that, per pound, right? Well, we thought that that was a little bit on the low end. Just in general, from the assumptions that they were using in their calculations seemed a little bit low. And also, realistically, one state legalizing cannabis is not going to take you all the way to a fully legal market price, right? Because it's still illegal in 48 states and the rest of the world. So there's still going to be a nice premium that people can charge for their product, completely independent of the actual cost of production. So we sort of split the baby. I mean, this is not scientific at all. And decided that we needed to we were going to operate with an estimate. I can't remember exactly what we were using as our cost of production per pound. But then we had to sort of extrapolate a tax level that would get us to the place that would generate essentially what those earlier bills had generated. The tax level that we would have had to attach to the retail end to get anywhere near what those fiscal notes said was going to be too high to be politically palatable. Ironically, what we came up with in the initiative wound up biting us because people didn't understand the difference between wholesale and retail when it comes to tax levels. So we looked at the work of Pat Oglesby, who was a former senior counsel with which committee, Dan? Putting you on the spot.
I
in
can't remember, but I
Congress.
know
I
him.
forget, but a tax, it's somebody who had worked with Congress on tax policy and now runs an independent institute in North Carolina and has published some work on tax strategies specifically to cannabis. And one of the things that we noticed was he said that it makes sense strategically to spread the tax burden over the supply chain so that you don't have essentially a bottleneck at one point, a chokehold at one point where all the taxes apply, because that makes it easier for people to avoid taxes. If you spread the tax out along the supply chain, there's one of the policy benefits to that is that not all of the tax will be avoided. Politically, another benefit to spreading the tax out along the supply chain is that you can use a smaller number at each point in the chain instead of saying, oh, we're going to tax you 40% at the end, which is essentially where we would have had to get something close to what the fiscal notes had said. So we did 25%. There's 3 licensees under 502. There's a producer and a processor and a retailer. And the 25% tax applies at each level. The one difference is that the producer and the processor can be combined. They can be one entity, and so the wholesale tax would only apply once there. So you'd have 25% at the wholesale level and 25% at the retail level. The problem that we ran into during the campaign is that people thought that 25 plus 25 plus 25 equals 75. And it doesn't when you're talking about taxing a product that is changing its price at every level, right? So the price at the retail level is not the same as the price at the producer level. You could use rough estimates and say, let's say that we're talking about something that costs $1 a gram at the producer level. Well, 25% of $1 is a quarter, 25 cents, right? Let's say that when it goes from the producer to the processor, you double it, right, to account for overhead and some reasonable profit margin for the producer. Well, then at the processor level, the 25% tax on $2 becomes 50 cents. So now you're up to 75 cents of tax on a $2 product. Let's say the retailer goes whole hog and marks it up to $5 a gram. 25% of $5 a gram is $1.25, right? So the tax is not the same at each level, and $1.25 plus the 75 cents from previously is $2. So you're talking about $2 of tax on top of a $5 product, which is still a steep tax, but it's not 75%. It's not 75% of $5. People didn't really understand that during the campaign, so that became an issue that we were dealing with, is that, oh my gosh, it's a 75% tax, when it's really not. And the producers and processors, if you're combining those, of course, then you're only getting taxed once at that wholesale level. The effective tax rate, in essence, winds up with the marijuana excise tax being roughly 27% if the producer and processor are combined, roughly 36 to 37% if they're not combined. In Washington State, our spirits, our hard alcohol, is taxed at 26%. Cigarettes are taxed at 41%, so we come in somewhere between the two. It's still a hefty sin tax, but it's not inconsistent with policies for alcohol and tobacco. What does that mean in terms of revenue? Well, the great thing for us, sort of, was that the Office of Financial Management, when it came up with its fiscal note for Initiative 502, what it did was an informal survey of all of the dispensaries that were in operation in Washington at the time, and it used those prices, those dispensary prices, to set its assumptions for what Initiative 502 would produce. Dispensary prices in Washington State averaged out at about $12 a gram. $12 a gram is basically street prices. They're basically black market prices. So they took the $25 a gram, or to the $12 a gram at retail, and then they cut it in half going up the supply chain. So they said, well, if it's $12 at retail, let's assume $6 at processor level and $3 per gram at producer level. And those are the assumptions that OFM used in determining how much tax Initiative 502 would generate. And they came up with a total of $560 million a year, which was a little more than $200 million a year more than we thought when we ran our numbers ourselves. So, do I think they're accurate? Probably not. I will say this though. They also were using government statistics to come up with the usage assumptions, like how much cannabis is actually being used in the state of Washington. And when they did those, when they calculated usage, they also did not include edible products at all, and they did not include any use amount for tourists. So they use straight up the SAMHSA data, the data from the Substance Abuse and Mental Health Services Administration, to determine what current use of marijuana is in Washington State. Most scholars that use that data will agree that it probably reflects about 20 to 40% underreporting, because, surprise, surprise, people who use marijuana aren't necessarily totally forthcoming when they're talking to somebody doing a government survey. So it could be that the numbers really underrepresent what actual use is in Washington, while overestimating how much tax will be generated once this is a legal product, and we can expect the prices to go down. So that's kind of where we are with what the economics look like.
Okay. I will certainly say that I don't know that we'll have quite the same problem here in Missouri, because I guarantee you that our auditor will just go, I don't know. We are not sure what the economic impact will be, and so it'll basically be up to us to fill that void. So getting into sort of the industry that is starting to come online in these legal states, there's this concept of, I've talked to Abhi about this quite a bit. I think we kind of disagree on what's happening here, but there's a concept of a green rush, that this is, where a lot of new jobs are going to come from, and certainly there are a lot of people, investing in the industry right now. So do you think that concept is valid? And if not, why not? And if so, why?
Sure. So for the most part, I actually am kind of bearish on the whole notion of green rush. So I'm pretty involved with the industry in many ways. As far as people in Washington goes, we work with Privateer a lot. There are angel networks now that have formed. Privateer is a private equity firm. They've raised like 10 million so far. They're on track to raise 25 million. They were the first private equity firm exclusively focused on cannabis in the cannabis industry. Raising a decent amount of money. Since then, there's another private equity firm, Cascade Solutions or something like that. And then there's an angel network now. So I mean, there's a lot of formal organization. There's a lot of commercial bank interest. There's a lot of private equity interest. There is a lot of interest in the market. I'm just not entirely convinced that interest is going to trickle down into this greenish notion that everyone is going to benefit that's going to be in this market. Some people are going to make a lot of money, right? But it's going to be those people with a lot of capital. It's going to be those people that are well organized and are going to clean up the market. It's just not clear to me that there's actually that much money to be made ultimately for the people on the bottom runs. And I think part of that is, so she referenced the RAND study on the legal price of cultivation and all that. As far as I'm concerned, and a lot of this data is government data. Some of this data, is proprietary data that we've collected, and some of this data is in the public domain, like RAND's data. As far as I'm concerned, and this is just guessing until we actually see what happens, the supply curve is going to shift rightward more than demand curve shifts rightward. I just don't see demand.
You might want to spell that out a little bit more.
Okay. Well, I just don't see. So basically, the supply curve shifting rightward, meaning that it's going to be cheaper to manufacture marijuana post legalization. More marijuana is going to be produced post legalization. It's not clear to me that commensurate with that rise in supply, commensurate with that fall in supply prices, commensurate with the fall in retail price, that we're actually going to see a meaningful elasticity, legal elasticity or a price elasticity. That is, are consumers actually going to consume more marijuana if they're already consumers of marijuana, or are consumers that have never consumed marijuana or aren't frequent consumers of marijuana now going to consume marijuana because it's cheap legally and it's cheap, in terms of the actual economic price. The available evidence doesn't suggest to me that that's actually going to happen. I think the LSTC is actually going to be much smaller than the fall in prices, and due to supply shocks, and also the fall in prices due to just the legal market reducing risk premium. If that's the case, then the total size of the economic pie is going to be brought from the underground above ground, but the total size of the economic pie is actually going to shrink as far as suppliers are concerned. So there may actually be less money to be made altogether. It's just not clear to me, unless there's a dramatic explosion in demand, that there's actually going to be all that much money to be made. What's going to happen is that there are going to be people that come in, like Privateer, like myself in some capacities, that are going to clean up the market on the top end, and then the bottom end is going to be, what it always was. They're going to be making just, normal market salaries. That's not to say that there aren't going to be jobs. It's not going to say that there aren't going to be opportunities, but the opportunities are going to be nowhere near what I think some of the proponents, would suggest.
Yeah, my response to that is basically what a rush always is. It's, when you had the gold rush out in California, it was a lot of people went out there, tried their hand at it. Most people did not actually make money on it, but it did establish a, very powerful industry in the state of California, and then later Alaska, or whatever industry it is that pops up in a real fast fashion. The industry ends up being powerful in the long run, but it's not. The people that are the first entrants into it are taking a very big risk because a lot of them are going to go bankrupt, basically. Allison, you want to comment on it based upon what you're actually seeing on the ground there in Washington, and how many people are actually trying to start new businesses and all that sort of thing?
Sure. Well, we don't know. This is kind of an exciting weekend because on Monday, that's when our Washington State Liquor Control Board opens the application window. We'll see who's actually going to apply for a license. And I think it'll be a mix of people who are very experienced cannabis growers who are going to, enter a new regulatory environment, and people who have absolutely no experience growing cannabis but have a long history of running businesses. And it'll be really interesting to see how this shakes out. What the Liquor Control Board has done, I think, to kind of respond to what Abhi is talking about a flood of supply coming in and it bottoming out, and kind of trying to, from a federal policy perspective, trying to make sure that there's not so much supply that encourages diversion. There's oversupply in Washington, so people are shipping their marijuana outside of Washington, and Eric Holder gets mad at us. But also I think there might be a little bit of trying to learn from the Colorado medical marijuana experience, where there was a rush and then there was a lot of failure. The Liquor Control Board is only going to license 2 million square feet of canopy area in the beginning, and they're only going to license 334 retail shops statewide. For comparison purposes, right now, last report I heard from the city of Seattle, we apparently have somewhere around 200 gray market dispensaries operating just in the city of Seattle, and the Liquor Control Board has announced that it only intends to license 21 retail shops in Seattle. So we've got some really interesting days ahead of us in terms of who's going to get licenses and how the market is going to be squeezed and where it's going to go. But all that to say that the Liquor Control Board is trying to license on the conservative end in the beginning, so that we don't have a huge oversupply of marijuana and too much failure in the market.
All right. How are we doing on time here? I don't have my watch.
4:15.
And then we're going to what, 4:30, 4:45?
You are scheduled to go to 4:45.
Okay. Let me think of another question then, because I was going to turn it over to the audience, but no.
If you don't stand, I don't think folks can hear you, John.
Okay. Keep your hand up on that. All right. So, I've always been of the opinion that the economic impact that people are looking at, mostly they look at just what the tax revenue is going to be for cannabis, but there is going to be a new industry here, an industry that existed before, obviously, but was either probably a lot of the, especially in Missouri, the industry is coming in from outside. There isn't a lot of domestic Missouri production. There's people that grow at home, but mostly that's for their own consumption or the consumption of people nearby. Most of what is being bought and sold in Missouri is coming in from outside, whether it's coming in from sort of gray markets in Colorado, Washington, California, or coming in from Mexico. So, it is going to be, in Missouri, once it's legal, it's going to be a pretty brand new market. Now, perhaps are we actually understating the economic impact long term because we're not looking at anything aside from the tax revenue that's going to come off consumption, that we're not looking at how this might affect, industry statewide in the fact that there's going to be more jobs, more people producing things, and also more people that are able to get jobs if there's a meaningful expungement of records. People that are pretty qualified that are probably right now outside the market and unable to find work.
So basically, John is saying there's more to this economic impact in terms of tax receipts and just the amount of marijuana that's sold. And the simplest way to actually talk about that, I think, is just that there are ancillary products, right? That it's not just marijuana product, it's also everything that's ancillary, whether it's paraphernalia that's used to consume, or whether it's security systems, POS systems, what have you, to monitor and maintain cultivation facilities, whether it's consultants like myself who are paid to work with cultivation facilities as well as dispensary facilities. So there is a lot of ancillary market. There's been no real research done on the size of the ancillary market. It's something that I've been kind of academically interested in, but are you familiar with it? No, there's really nothing that's out there. It's really difficult to collect that data. It hasn't really been collected. I'm inclined to think that, sure, the tax receipts are going to, as far as the fiscal impact goes, state level fiscal impacts, that's going to increase tax receipts. As far as economic impact goes, the size of the economic market is a lot larger than, although admittedly it's going to be taxed at a much lower rate, right? Because all that ancillary market, even if it's the same size as as just the product market, is going to be taxed at 5%, right? The sales tax in Missouri and not, or what is the sales tax in Missouri?
Well, it depends on where you are. I mean, it could be as low as like 5%.
State
It could be
level
as,
tax,
I think the state level tax is like 5.
Yeah, state level tax like 5%, so it's going to be lower than, presumably lower than what actually ends up bottoming out on the actual product end for cannabis. So ultimate economic impact, I'm not entirely sure that's going to be actually all that meaningful. Maybe we'll increase by some percentage, south of 100%, but we just have to guess. The other component that we're missing here is also hemp. So I've talked to Myron about this a lot, and one of the things that we feel that make us very unpopular in the movement is we're very bearish on hemp. I don't really see an economic future for hemp in the same way that I think a lot of people in the movement and probably in this room do. Hemp has been legal in other countries, in Western countries, most notably France, and in Eastern producer countries like China for decades now, and we don't really see adoption to the extent that we would want to if it was actually as viable a crop, especially when the subsidy schemes in other Western countries like France and producer countries like China isn't like the United States where it's so dedicated to corn. So that, among a couple other reasons, either suggests to me that hemp is actually not all that viable yet, that the market is telling us that, or that Americans are just exceptional, right? And that hemp isn't going to take off until Americans do it, which
Surprise me.
We are the largest hemp market, right? I mean, we are the consumers of it primarily.
I don't think we're the largest hemp market by far, though. I think we are the largest hemp market, but I don't think we even constitute a plurality in the global market. Adding that to the mix as well, taking all of these factors together, we are probably understating the case. But I don't want to overstate the case by making a lot of estimates that we can't really justify. So that's why we don't really include those in there.
Sort of in response to that, I would say, it is at least a $500 million domestic market in hemp. So I mean, it may not be totally change the scope of the economy, but it's a $500 million market domestically. Chances are that it would be a lot of that would be grown domestically if people, transportation costs. We got to be part of that. I mean, it's not that expensive to grow hemp. It grows pretty easily. So.
Yeah, I mean, it would take long-run changes because right now there's no incentive to produce hemp in the United States because of the subsidy schemes, right? So the way the subsidy is scheduled, hemp is going to be a loser crop for most farmers. So I mean, you'd have to legalize hemp first. You'd have to see how it takes across the country, and then you'd have to change the subsidies, and we'll see what happens long term.
Right, fair enough. Allison, do you have any comments on the larger ramifications of marijuana legalization beyond just the tax impact for the state? What could happen? The long-term benefits from legalization economically.
Yeah, no, the only thing I would add, I think the ancillary products is the kind of the key consideration, and there's a number of things in 502. There are places where we could have additional players where we don't have it. For example, people that would transport the marijuana from point A to point B. We didn't provide for that in 502. So we're probably going to be looking at legislation in the upcoming session that would actually allow for security systems, for contractors essentially to transport marijuana from location to location. But in addition to all those ancillary products, there's also the idea of the money staying in the state, right? Or in the United States, but for now, the money staying in Washington, the money staying in Colorado, rather than, in Washington it may not be that big of an impact because we have such a large domestic market already. But in other states like in Missouri, I'm imagining that a lot of the marijuana that comes into Missouri is not necessarily being grown in Missouri, and that the dollars being spent on marijuana are going somewhere other than into your local market. So it's another possible benefit.
I've always kind of been of the belief that, and this is really hard to measure. I mean, I can't even imagine how you would go about figuring it out. But probably the biggest benefit economically to marijuana legalization is that you're just not going to have a lot of people that have criminal records that hold them back, because really when you get down to it, what an economy is driven by is not resources or things, it's people. And if you have smart people that are being held back by a criminal record, well, you're just shooting yourself in the foot economically. And I think that's the main thing, that when we stop doing that, we're going to have a long-term benefit there. Measuring that, though, will be, would you have any idea how to go about measuring that? You're usually the one that's...
There actually are labor econ papers, papers in the labor economics literature that would study the economic cost to those individuals. We can multiply that by the cost by the amount of individuals. So I mean, it is actually very tractable. It's actually easier to measure than study.
Really? All right. Well, we might want to look into doing that. That answer surprises me. All right. Well, are there any questions from the audience? Yeah, right here.
How do you feel about growing on a large scale, like opening a medical plantation? Is that good for economic success, you feel, in the next, say, 5 or 10 years? Of course, like all legally, of course, but wanting to open like a larger scale plantation.
Yeah, in Colorado, I know, I don't think you can grow it outdoors.
I was thinking
right?
more Emerald Triangle, Northern California, Washington.
So when you say medical plantation, what do you, I mean, this is just a regular, large
I'm a nurse,
Uh-huh.
and I'm looking into University of California, San Francisco. They have a 2-year holistic and naturopath medicine route. So I was going to go maybe get some further education, but I didn't know how to go about that. And is that something you think is smarter than like opening a dispensary? Maybe I'd be able to like prescribe, once I get my certifications and things. Do you think that'd be economically smart?
Oh, well, I mean, I know, okay, so as far as the macroeconomic impact, I was kind of confused because, of course, if you're growing marijuana, it's going to, and if you sell it on the retail level, it's going to increase economic impact. So on a personal level, so what you're saying is basically you want to open up a clinic where you can prescribe in-house.
Maybe not even a clinic, just growing.
Just growing. Well, there's a lot of money to be made in growing. So one of the things that we do, right now is we're building out plans right now, financial models and process plans and whatnot for a few large companies that are looking to make investments in the United States and in Canada.
I just want to know about how going about that, who I would need to contact. To get it up and going.
To get facilities up and going.
Yeah.
That's a conversation we could talk about later, I think.
Yeah.
All right. Yeah, right here and then back.
To follow up on what you were saying, are you seeing a business model 20 years from today that would be like an RJ Reynolds or 3 or 4 giant, corporations, or are you seeing mom and pop grow operations?
Independent growing projects, successful.
So I would say in the long run, so the problem right now is actually something that kind of surprised me. When you go to Colorado and when you go to Washington, and you go around the country, to Oregon for that matter, and you go see grow facilities, it's actually remarkable the standard of quality. The quality level is actually pretty low. There are actually very few growers, and part of this has to do with legal stigma, part of this has to do with self-selection, what have you. There are actually very few growers right now that have the knowledge to sustain perpetual harvest in 50,000 square feet or higher facilities. So right now in the short run, it's just not going to happen. And as an economist coming in from the outside, I thought there's no way. Everyone must be able to do this. This is all. In the short run, it's going to be fine. But actually going in, talking to clients, talking to people that are trying to start businesses, walking around in grow rooms in Colorado. It's remarkable the variation in quality. It's also remarkable how bad most grow facilities are. So there are very few people right now in the country, I think, who are actually going to be able to sustain 50,000 square feet or higher facilities. In the long run, you're going to have people presumably that have PhDs in botany or biology.
Right, that's what I'm trying to just go.
But in the short run, building out a brand, especially building out that cannabis-specific experience, right now would be useful because in 20 years it's going to be much harder. The barriers to entry to the market are going to be much higher, as opposed to right now. Quality levels are so low that this would be, this would be the time to get in.
Are you putting quality and quantity together? You're saying, you're using the 50,000 square feet or larger. I mean, can you have, in Nebraska, for example, we have an initiative where we don't allow for corporate farming. So a big corporation cannot come in and have any agricultural business, not on the grow level. And so I'm wondering, what is a feasible size for a, a family to have for an operation?
For you, I mean, for anyone
Or any
personally in
family,
Nebraska?
Yeah, like, you're kind of, it seems as though, I realize that growing indoors, you have to have an indoor facility and stuff like that, but is 50,000 square foot kind of the cutoff for making money, or for
No, but I'm
quality in
just,
your book?
no, I'm just saying, look, we work with a lot of private equity firms, we work with, private investors, we work with, just the other day, we were talking to, someone in, these businessmen in Boston, they're gonna put money into a 50,000 square foot facility there, right, in Massachusetts, and that's not even, it's not even legalized there. All I'm trying to say is, the nature of the landscape right now is that if you want a chance, these people are going to price you out because these people are going to be able to produce at a larger scale. And this is the scale of the business already, right? Things are already at that level where people are trying to, 20,000 or higher, right? In Colorado, there are no more 15,000 square foot facilities, very soon. It'll be 20,000 or higher, 30,000 or higher, and then soon 30,000 or higher. And the biggest players in the market in Washington right now are already trying to scope out 3,000 facilities. I talked to people in Washington who've already bought several 50,000 square foot facilities, like supermarket stores that are empty right now. They'll load up a facility and product, and that's just the nature of the industry. I don't know whether the context in Nebraska is going to be different or not, but around the country we're seeing that this is a scale at which things operate. As far as quality and quantity, what I meant was the ability to sustain perpetual grows. So not have your grows wiped out. Reliable projections, a standard of quality beyond just quantity. But those two correlate.
I just want to add two things there. With regards to the size of these facilities, that's also not, if you put it in terms of other products, in other agricultural products, that's nothing. If you grow corn, it's, good God, hundreds of acres. This is...
Very soon, small facilities are going to be, we're already seeing this, very soon small facilities are going to be just quaint trivialities, right? Oh, it's my local co-op, right? That's a 30,000 square facility.
Well, the other thing though is that right now there are no corporations getting involved in this, basically. In the ancillary market, sure, but the thing is that at least right now, since it's still federally illegal, no corporation will touch it. Because there's still, the guy that was talking about asset forfeiture, there's still the threat of forfeiture hanging over the corporations' heads. So, their corporations are by nature pretty risk averse, and so they're not going to get involved in a market unless they're totally sure that they are not going to, have all their assets.
Maybe public corporations, but that's certainly not the case for private companies that have enough money. There are ways.
Right.
Oh, yeah, but private equity and, angel investor firms, it's not going to be a publicly traded, company. Anheuser-Busch is not going to get involved. That's, or RJ.
You'd be surprised at the size of large private companies that are interested.
Oh, that's fair. Okay. Oh, wait, hold on. I said back there a while ago, I never got back to it. So, yeah.
If a dispensary, once it was legalized, had multiple strains that they stabilized themselves, and would they be able to put a patent on it or have product label protection, anything that could keep it like liquor bottles, you can't just make liquor and put it in Jimmy Beam bottle.
So at the very least, right, we're going to have to wait for federal legalization before we can talk about patenting a lot of these strains. There are a few companies, including one that I'm involved in, that are actually looking at taking this somewhat private, so it's not really so much that, you don't have the protection of a patent, but you do have some kind of a brand awareness. So, there are some companies, like I said, and one that I'm involved in, that will take a free market approach to dispensaries being able to say, this is certified by this private council as being, this strain, right? So you can register your strain with a private company, and that private company will signal to consumers, dispensaries, whoever is in the market, that this strain is your strain. This is the brand. That brand isn't diluted. It's not really a patent protection. You can't sue people, right? You can't prevent them from doing things, but you do get some of the branding and protection aspects of patents, and that's about the best we can do in a private system, right? In a private market system.
Thank you.
Yeah, right there.
And specifically with the licenses and limited number of licenses that are going out, is there going to be any kind of protection or encouragement of competitiveness for new and entering businesses, as opposed to those that are going to be pre-existing and out there and obviously be the first ones to get the selection for those licenses?
Right, so Washington's different from Colorado. In Colorado, the medical marijuana industry actually gets right of first refusal. Essentially, they get to enter the full recreational market first. In Washington, we don't have a legal medical marijuana market. We don't have anybody licensed as a producer or processor or dispensary or anything like that. So everybody's starting at ground zero. I mentioned earlier the 2 million square foot total cap for the state. The way that the licenses are going to be, the licenses that you can apply for are basically small, medium, and large, and small, medium, and large within the context of this licensing system. I think Abhi makes a really good point. 50,000 square feet sounds kind of big to us, but that's just over an acre, 1 acre. That's not that big when we're talking about farming. But in Washington, the limits are 2,000 square feet for small one, up to 10,000 square feet for a medium, and up to 30,000 square feet for large. And LCB, it's going to be interesting to see what LCB does with this, because they're going to have to see who applies. There's no limit on the number of producer and processor licenses. So if there are, 8,000 small applications, they can all have a license. It's only the retail outlets that'll be a limited number of licenses. But yeah.
And for the retail outlets, is there to be protections for small businesses and new entrepreneurs to be able to have a seat at the table so that they can open their own businesses as opposed to the pre-existing businesses that are out there right now?
Pre-existing businesses have absolutely no edge because they're not recognized. So everybody is starting from square one.
With, their knowledge of, the community and stuff like that too, like their ties to people, whether or not they'd be able to get the licenses over those that would obviously not.
None of that's weighted. I mean, the application process for the Liquor Control Board, and the licenses are available online. So if you go to the Washington State Liquor Control Board website, they actually have really robust pages that have all the information about the rulemaking. They have the link to the applications, and you can look at the applications. But there's nothing in the application that gives you any credit at all for having grown marijuana ever before in your life. It's basically, we're going to check out your finances, we're going to check out your criminal history background, do you have an address, and let me see your operation plan, and let's make sure that your operation plan meets our security requirements. But you could be a used car salesman coming into it and have just as good a shot as somebody who's been growing cannabis for 40 years. Now, in terms of size, and that's an interesting question because right now they're only planning on licensing 334 retail stores. So again, there's nothing in the rules that says how is LCB going to figure out how big each store can be. We don't know that. Yeah.
Also, as another question for retail stores, the definition of like retail sales, what they would be. Say things like breeder objects, like cuttings, clones, seeds, things like that. Would that be considered retail sales if it's not the actual flower of the plant?
No, it's not. Such a great question. One of the categories that we don't have in 502 is a breeder license. And that's something that I think we should think about. So there's only producers, processors, and retailers. And retailers aren't allowed to sell live plant material. They can only sell products that are ready for consumption. So a producer could be the breeder and the producer can sell to other producers, but a producer can't sell directly to the consumer market because in the Washington law, we don't allow home growing. It's only usable products.
How much time do we have left?
You've got 8 minutes.
Okay. And then Trish, okay, here.
How much does it cost to get the license in Washington? Also, does the state require a cash bond?
No cash bond, and it's a really reasonable price. It's $250 to apply, and if you're granted a license, it's $1,000 annually.
You have a question, Dave?
Yes, forgive me if you just covered this, but can one pay the $1,250, and if approved, can one supply oneself?
Basically, he's asking if you can home grow by buying
No.
a license.
Yes.
No.
No?
No.
Okay.
Not at home. They won't, the Liquor Control Board made it clear that they will not license any residential properties because,
Yep.
sorry.
Let's say you have a warehouse or whatever,
No, because we also have a tied house rule, like alcohol. So producers and processors cannot also be retailers, and they can't have any.
Can they be consumers? Can Jack Daniels drink his own whiskey?
Oh, he's dead now.
Yeah.
No one in Washington has ever thought about this.
Apparently.
This is kind of cool.
It occurred to me right off the bat.
So if I'm a processor, is there anything that prevents me from, because you can do, I believe that they're going to accommodate sampling.
Yeah.
Sampling.
So, I'm about to get myself in trouble. This is being recorded, isn't it?
Oh, no, not necessarily.
Shut that off.
No, we'll turn that off.